Okay. So, all right, we're up. We're on. Okay. Anyway, welcome everybody to the March meeting. Hopefully we'll get some more people in the live audience to show up, besides the two diehards we have here today. At least I know Miriam and Anna Sylvia are on. Or did you just connect your phone to it?
No.
Oh, okay.
They're on.
Okay, great. So, and someone left. They lost it already. Oh well. Whatevs. Okay, so welcome to the March meeting. We are going to be going through our usual beginner session and advanced user session. Today's advanced user session will include a live demo of doing raw image editing. Okay. I will be using Darktable to do the image editing because that's what I have loaded on my machine, but the techniques that I will show you apply to any one of the raw image processing tools that are out there because they're all pretty similar. If you're using ones that use classic camera controls, you know, like exposure, color correction, that kind of thing. If you're using the Instagram types, they're just going to throw filters on stuff. That's all filter based. So that's a more simplified system. And there are a couple that work that way and have the classic controls buried deep inside. But you can, if you learn the classic controls, then you know what the filters do, and then you can actually tweak the filters to your need. So let's get rolling. So switch to this one here. So, all right, so starting the beginner's class, which is going to be Camera Basics Part 2. All right, just a refresher for all the pros that are here. And first of all, we're going to go into the actual parts of a camera. All right, so there's two major components of a camera. Remember last time I'm talking about DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. We're going to kind of focus on those types of cameras as opposed to smartphones and compact point and shoots, which do not have removable lenses. Okay, you have the camera body and the lens. Pretty straightforward. Okay, the camera body houses the imaging medium. The imaging medium could be a sensor, it could be film, okay, could be a plate of glass with chemicals on it, depending on how crazy you want to do it. Okay. It provides the controls for taking an exposure. It houses the power, electronics, and all the mechanical components of the camera. And it usually provides some sort of viewfinder or framing technique so that you can frame your image and not have to guess. That could be a display on the back of the camera. It could be an actual viewfinder in the case of an optical viewfinder in the case of a DSLR, or an electronic viewfinder in the case of a mirrorless camera. And it's usually fairly comfortable to hold. No one makes a camera that's painful to hold because then it's not a handheld camera. This isn't to say that there aren't cameras out there that are painful to hold. If you ever tried to use an old school technical camera, that requires being mounted on a tripod because it is just too big and too cumbersome. You know, the old bellows style cameras, those are just too big. Even the ones that were made portable, like a Speed Graphic or something like that, it's still a giant box with handles on the sides, and it was always a chore to try and use. Okay. The other main component is the lens, which contains all of the optical components of the camera and gather and focus light on the imaging medium. Okay. The lens is as important as the body, sometimes even more so. Photographers who have settled on a system that meets their needs will often gather themselves quite the harem of lenses, and I use that. That's my own term for a group of lenses because it's as expensive to keep as a harem. So, hey, we've just increased our audience by 33%. Welcome, Merv. Okay. Anyway, we're in the beginner class, just going over some of the basics. All right. So the lens can be purely mechanical, or it can be electromechanical. But purely mechanical meaning the lens literally has zero electronics inside of it. Classic Leica M lenses are like that. They have no electronics in them whatsoever. And in fact, the only way the camera knows what lens has been mounted on it is that there's a series of black dots painted on the flange that a sensor on the camera body reads and interprets what lens it's supposed to be. It's a code. And you can actually fake that code on non-Leica lenses, but there's actually a kit you can get that lets you use a Sharpie to put like if you're using a 35mm f1.4 Voigtlander lens, well, the Leica doesn't have a code for that lens, but it does have a code for the 35mm 1.4 Leica lens. So you get this little kit, and it has the little loops, and you get a Sharpie, and you put the code for the Leica lens, and then it thinks it's a 1.4, the 35mm 1.4 lens. Not that it's going to make any kind of corrections for it, but at least writes it down in the metadata of the shot, so that when you bring it into your software, it can make corrections. Okay, and lenses can be, the electromechanical lenses are what's more common today for DSLRs. There's motors, there's electronics, there's all kinds of stuff. Hell, lenses nowadays have firmware. You have to do firmware updates not only of the electronics in your camera, but of the electronics in your lens.
Power zooms also.
So,
And power zooms.
Yep. Anyway, and lenses are defined by their focal length and their maximum aperture. Maximum aperture is the second number. You'll see, like I just said, a 35mm f1.4. So that's its focal length, 35 millimeters, and f1.4 is its maximum aperture, the widest setting of its aperture ring. And lenses can be fixed length or variable length, which are colloquially known as primes and zooms. Okay.
Let me ask a question.
Sure.
The millimeters. How could I define that by feet, basically?
By feet?
Mm-hmm. It's more like field of view.
It's the field of view, really.
Field of view.
Okay,
mostly.
so a normal lens, and that's going to be next month's class on lenses. We're going to dedicate a whole beginner class to lenses. But the normal field of view mimics what human vision can see. Like if you're looking for how much you see in one shot, sort of. Because the camera's not the eye. The eye actually has a very narrow field of view, but you scan what you're looking at, and then the brain pastes it all together into a clear picture. Okay? But what the eye normally sees has been declared to be a 50mm lens. Okay? So 50 is considered a normal lens. Anything shorter than 50, say a 35 or a 24 or a 16, are wide angle because they see more than the width of the lens, than the width of the human eye. And anything longer, generally, than 50, the range is from like 40 to 60, are considered normal length lenses. Like more than 60 millimeters is considered telephoto because you're seeing narrower than the human field of vision, and you can see things that are further away close up. Okay? So that's the distinction between normal, wide angle, and telephoto. Okay? And it is seriously the focal length. Now, if you use a crop sensor camera, you have to do math to figure out what your effective focal length actually is. You have a full frame camera, so you have no problem. The numbers on your lens are the numbers on your lens. They don't have to do any math. Times 1. Real simple. Okay? Weirdly enough, if you start going up the scale into medium format cameras, which have larger than 35mm sensors, the crop factor is reversed. Generally, crop factor DSLRs, the lenses tend to become longer, like 1.5 or 1.3 times longer. But with crop sensor medium format cameras, they get wider. They actually get wider. So a crop sensor medium format camera lens has to convert it, the focal length of the lens into 35 millimeters, so you have an idea of what it means. You actually have to multiply it like by 0.79. It's this really strange number. Now, if you decide to drop a BMW's worth of money on a Phase 1 IQ4 100 megapixel camera, that has a full frame 645 sensor. And the module alone that contains the sensor costs $59,000. But then your medium format lenses are the correct focal length for medium format. So that's a math you never have to worry about unless your subject matter has a title that starts with super. You know, supermodel, supercar, super yacht, super home. That's willing to pay a $20,000 sitting fee.
Super rich.
Super rich in general, yeah. So, the camera controls. So the camera controls are the buttons and such that you press on the camera to make it take a photograph. But they'd have different effects. So when you take a photograph, what you're actually doing is you're exposing the imaging medium, and I'm going to just narrow that down to sensor just for our sake, because imaging medium, it gets cumbersome to say after a while. That when you're going to expose light on the sensor to take an image, all right? That's how you capture a photo. The sensor sits inside of a light-tight little box, and then you let the light in. Now, the controls do different things. Two of them do different things to the light directly, and one of them does something to the sensor. And we're going to talk about each one of them. So the three controls are shutter speed, aperture, and ISO sensitivity. And there's been some discussion lately online regarding ISO sensitivity on digital cameras, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So these three controls are your main controls for capturing an image. All right? So the shutter is a mechanical/electronic device that interrupts the flow of light. It literally cuts the light off from the sensor. Okay? It can be located inside the lens. These are called leaf shutters and are shaped like an iris. Or it could be a curtain that's right in front of the sensor, and that's called a focal plane shutter. The focal plane is literally the surface of the sensor, okay? Because that's where you're focusing your light, and that's where you're capturing your image. So a focal plane shutter literally comes up right in front of the sensor. It may not touch it, but it's as good as touching it, okay? The aperture is an iris in your lens, and if you have a leaf shutter lens, it's a separate iris. It's another iris in your lens. With leaf shutter lenses, you have two irises. You have the aperture and you have the shutter. The difference between the iris of the aperture and the iris of the shutter is that the iris of the shutter closes all the way down and does not let in any light, whereas the iris of the aperture can close down to a little pinhole, but it never closes all the way. Because what good would that do if it shuts off the light? So, and then the last one is, skipped ahead. So the aperture is more like a constant control over the flow of light through your lens. It's a more constant control as opposed to the shutter, which is an interruption. Okay, you're constricting. Think of it like the nozzle on the end of a hose. Okay, the more you open it up, the more water flows through it. The more you tighten it down, the less water flows through it, but then the behavior of the water changes. Not that the speed of light changes for this thing, but the way the light behaves in another way changes, okay? And we'll get to that. The last one is ISO sensitivity. Okay, so ISO sensitivity is basically how sensitive is the sensor to light, okay? All sensors have a base sensitivity. By changing the ISO value on your camera or setting it to auto, the camera will move the sensitivity of the sensor up and down to accommodate changing lighting conditions. And this changes the amount of light you need to capture to make a proper exposure. Okay? So getting more in depth with each one real quick. All three, by the way, are interrelated. Okay? Changing one affects the other two. So shutter speed. So in order to take a photograph, you press the shutter release. That's the button on the top of your camera that makes it go click. Okay. Sometimes that click is a recording. Like when you take a photograph on your cell phone and it makes a camera noise, that's actually a recorded camera noise. There's no actual shutter noise being made. It's all electronic. Okay?
So let me ask a question, because I'm gonna break this. The shutter release,
Mhm.
on some cameras, I noticed they have focus and, release, and some have release and focus.
Okay, so that's a specialized control in the back where you tell the camera priority is getting the focus or priority is making the release. Okay, so for example, if you are shooting with autofocus comes in two flavors. We're jumping ahead, but that's okay. Autofocus comes in two flavors on cameras: single shot autofocus and continuous autofocus. You use single shot autofocus when you're doing portraits, still life, landscapes, things that don't move. You know, kids that are on the birthday table going to take a picture blowing out the candles. Single shot autofocus is what you need there. Continuous autofocus is for sports, models on runways, uh, shows being performed live on stage, dance, anything where people are moving around, cars racing on racetracks. Okay, that's what continuous autofocus is about. The difference is that when you're in single autofocus, your shutter will focus and then release once it has acquired focus. When you're in continuous autofocus, you will try to acquire focus, but if you don't, it'll fire anyway. You're usually going to be firing a burst, and while it's firing the burst, it will try to reacquire and correct the focus while you're firing the burst. Now, in the case of a DSLR, you have a mirror inside the lens box, inside the camera body, that has to flip up out of the way every time you take a photograph. The camera can only focus when the mirror is down. So when the mirror comes back down, it's going to try and reacquire that focus on that moving target. So you might release before you acquire focus, but you'll pick it up along the way as it's flapping up and down, depending on how fast you're shooting. If you shoot slower, you give it more of a chance to, if you shoot like 3 frames a second, it has more of a chance to try and acquire the focus afterwards or maintain the focus than shooting 5 or 10 or 20 frames a second. Mirrorless cameras have a slight advantage in this respect because their phase detect points, which are good for tracking moving objects, are actually embedded into the sensor and not in a module that has to be reflected via a mirror. So the only thing that blocks it is if the shutter comes up and then it comes back down and it's on the sensor and it's tracking. So there's less technology ballet happening on the inside to make it happen. And for example, Olympus just announced their new OMD EM1X. That's their new top-of-the-line camera. It has superseded the one that I use, and it is oriented towards sports photography and moving targets. And they have spent a considerable amount of money and time to improve the tracking focus on that camera since there is no mirror.
Okay, so is it worth, because the price between a mirror compared to the mirrorless is what about? Is it that really important, or is it based on what you are shooting? Because like you just said, if you're going to be doing more stuff with movement, then maybe the mirrorless might be because it's able to.
Mirrorless, in my opinion, is the future. Okay, everyone is moving that way. Canon just finished announcing their full-frame mirrorless system. Nikon just finished announcing their full-frame mirrorless system. Sony's ahead of the game by 5 years. Okay, their professional cameras are all mirrorless now. All right. Now, the question I ask you: is your camera serving your needs? Are you getting good images out of it?
Mm-hmm.
Then run with it. You don't need to spend the money if it doesn't do you. If it doesn't give you some sort of tactical advantage
Right.
or what you need to do,
Right.
then don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you'll be fine.
Okay.
Okay. If you have a preference for it, that's perfectly legit a reason too. I happen to have a preference for it. Okay, but that's just me. The question is, are you willing to adapt to mirrorless, because mirrorless has its quirks, being comfortable with your DSLR mirrored camera? If you are, then you're willing to give mirrorless a try. If you say no, I gotta have the optical viewfinder. I gotta see things with my own eyes, not through some little mini screen. Then mirrorless is not going to be for you. You know, it's a personal choice, but you have to. The technology is getting better and better all the time. You know.
Yeah, Carlos, one of the biggest drivers is if you're gonna get into video.
Yeah.
If you're gonna get into video, then mirrorless just blows.
Yes, because because when you're doing video on a DSLR, you're going to flip up the mirror anyway.
Right.
Because you're going to be looking through the display in the back. Whereas with a mirrorless camera, you're going to be looking through the viewfinder.
So what you see is what you get.
It also allows you to preview the exposure before you take the shot, so you can tell if you're underexposing.
But my camera does that right now.
No, not live in the viewfinder before you take the shot. Before you shoot it.
Right.
No.
I believe.
No.
If you're doing video?
No. Stills.
Oh, stills. Okay.
Video, yes, because you're looking through the screen in the back.
Right,
Yes, you'll see that. But I'm talking about stills.
Right.
Mirrorless, you can preview the shot before you shoot it.
See if you're overexposed, underexposed.
You can even turn on the exposure blinkies in the viewfinder.
But I thought that's what all that peaking and all that is all doing.
Peaking is focus.
Zebra striping is overexposure.
No, zebra striping is also focus.
Does it focus?
It's a Sony thing.
Oh.
It's a focus tool. But you can put the over and underexposure blinkies
Yes.
inside your viewfinder.
Right.
So you'll see your overexposed and your underexposed parts blinking in the shot
Right.
before you take the photo. You know how sometimes you put it in the
Right.
camera and it's blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh man, I blew this part of the shot, or I underexposed this part of the shot, or something, right? Or I'm going to have to work this in post. But anyway, with mirrorless cameras, you can actually turn that on in the viewfinder ahead of time and see what's going on before you do it. Anyway, carrying on our merry way. So, shutter speeds. Shutter speeds are basically the amount of time it takes the curtain to cut off the flow of light to the sensor. This can range in modern DSLRs and mirrorless cameras from 1/32,000th of a second to several hours. The time it takes to do this has different effects in the photograph. Very short shutter speeds have the ability to stop very fast motion, like bullets in flight, hummingbird wings, that sort of stuff. Bolts of lightning, okay? Very long shutter speeds have the ability to capture motion over time, low light situations, or capture images in near darkness. Okay? Remember what I said before. This is mitigated by the other two controls. You can fiddle with your shutter speed if you adjust the other two to accommodate it. Okay? The aperture, like I said, is an iris in the lens, and if you have a leaf lens, it's a second iris in the lens, and it is always located in front of the shutter mechanism, whether it's the leaf shutter or the focal plane shutter. It's always in front. And it controls how much light is passing through the lens. Like that analogy I made earlier where it's like the nozzle on a garden hose, that you open it up and close it down to control the flow of light through it. It's more of a constant control as opposed to the shutter, which is an interrupt. Okay? Think of the shutter as putting your hand in front of a flashlight. Okay? And the aperture is taking a piece of paper with a hole in it and sticking it in front of the flashlight, as opposed to your hand. Your hand's going to cover the light and not going to see anything. But you could put a paper with a piece of hole, and it narrows down the beam of light. Okay? What this control generally does by doing this is it controls the depth of field. How much of the image is in focus at the same time. Lenses that are considered very fast, meaning they have very low maximum aperture numbers, can gather lots and lots of light in dimly lit situations, but also have the side effect of having a very, very thin plane of focus. So much so that some portrait lenses, if you focus on someone's eyes, their nose and the tips of their ears will be out of focus. That's how thin. It can be paper thin. It's also, that particular thing, depth of field, is also controlled by focal length and distance to subject.
So then, if you're a professional, like, something like, do you think that you lose, like, sharpness photos when you use the aperture, even though you get the depth of field with the subject that you're focusing on? Could that subject also be a little bit out of focus as well?
Okay, if you are shooting wide open,
Right.
the
Wide
max
open, right.
the lens can open up. The
Right.
iris is completely
Right,
out of the
yes.
way.
Mhm.
Depending on the speed of the lens, what is its maximum aperture? If you have an f4 lens,
Mhm.
it will have more depth of field wide open than an f2 lens, which will have more depth of field than an f1.4 lens, which will have more depth of field than an f.95 lens. And that's running the gamut of the fast lenses. Okay? So, the super fast ones, like those 0.95s, the 1.1s that you will spend a lot of money on, okay? You're not buying them because they're sharp. You're buying them because they will gather a heck of a lot of light. So you're going to be doing a lot of low light, no flash kind of photography. You may stop it down just a little bit just to bring up the focus, the sharpness. But because they're that fast, they gather more light. Let's say an f.95 lens will gather, that's 2 stops faster than an f2 lens, okay? It will gather, if you put it to f2, it still gathers 2 more stops of light than an f2 lens wide open, because it's actually faster. It's got more lens, it's got more glass collecting light, okay? They're not the same. This is why f-stop is a wonky kind of measurement for this sort of thing. In cinematography, they have another measurement called the t-stop. It's the transmissive stop. And that literally measures how much light is coming out of the back of the lens. And those values are absolute. A T1.5 lens is a T1.5 lens is a T1.5 lens. You put it at T2, even a T1.5 lens at T2 is the same as a T2 lens at T2. It's absolutely the same. So technically, if you want to use cinema lenses, which are exactly the same as photo lenses, except they have A, gears for controlling their aperture and their focus, and B, their apertures are declicked. Because believe it or not, if you're recording, you click when you click the aperture, it actually makes it doesn't make a smooth transition in the film when you're doing video. And sometimes it can be recorded in the audio track being recorded by your camera because it's being transmitted through the body of the camera. Weird but true. Okay? Anyway, the other thing that the aperture controls is the lens's ability to render the out of focus parts of the image, and this is called bokeh. The more blades an aperture iris has, the rounder the circle it makes, the more pleasing a bokeh it has. And that also has something to do with how the lens elements are arranged. But some lenses are known for their wonderful bokeh. Like, for example, the Nikon 85mm f1.4 lens is known in the industry as the cream machine, because whatever is behind the subject at f1.4 has just turned into molten butter. It is soft, totally soft, and you have a tremendous amount of separation between your subject and the background. It might be a wall this far behind them, you couldn't tell. It's that soft, okay? Maybe the back of their head is out of focus. That's okay. Now, if they're, if they're Pinocchio, yeah, the front of the nose is going to be out of focus too. But a normal human face, you might stop it down to 1.8, and you got the whole face in shot. Just the face. The ears can be out of focus too, because unless you're, an ear doctor, and then that's important to you. But you remember, whenever you're doing a portrait, especially with fast lenses, focus on the eyes. As long as the eyes are in focus, everybody forgives everything else. Okay? But that's a rule of thumb. These are all rules of thumb. They're not laws. Okay? So, the last one we're talking about is isosensitivity. Now, isosensitivity originally was determined by a group called the American Standards Association, and it used to be called ASA. Remember that film used to say, oh, ASA 100 film, ASA 200 film. Well, the American Standards Association, before they came up with this in the 70s, this is in the 70s, different manufacturers had different sensitivities of film, and there was no way to tell whose was better than the other one than just by trying it. Okay? Then the the ASA came and said, you know what? We're going to take this film and we're declaring this film as standard. The standard exposure of this film is what's going to be the basis of our gauge for measuring all this. This became ASA 100 film. Films that were slower than this got a number that's smaller. Films that were faster than this and more sensitive to light got a higher number. So you had like Tri-X Pan, which was ASA 400. You could push it to 1600 by souping it different when you were processing the chemicals. It was all chemistry and photons, and that's how you did it with film. With a digital camera, it's actually closer to a microphone than it is to film in this respect. Because when you have a microphone, you have a control called the gain control, where you're turning up the sensitivity of the microphone, okay? And so the microphone, when you turn the sensitivity all the way down, the microphone has a base amount of sound that it listens to. And if you have it turned all the way down, you may have to yell really loud into the microphone in order for it to pick you up. But by turning up the gain, you can turn down the volume on you, and it picks up the volume for you. But then it starts to hear other things, which they refer to as noise, right? It's noise. And that was a term that came from electronics called signal to noise ratio. Well, it's the same thing with digital sensors, digital image sensors. It has a certain amount of light it can capture at its base value. You can turn up the gain, and you're basically just upping the voltage going into the sensor so that it becomes more sensitive to light. But then you start generating weird little pixels that shouldn't be there because of the signal to noise ratio, and that's known as digital grain, or just simply digital noise. It might be black and white specks, or it could be colored ones. One's luma, and the other one's chroma. Luma is brightness specks, and the chroma are color specks. And there's software that cleans it up for you. And sometimes the camera itself will do things like do what they call dark frame subtraction, where it'll take the shot, especially if you do a long exposure, and then it has a recorded shot of blackness, and then it compares the two, and then will delete the spec value based on the dark frame. It has a pre-recorded dark frame. So that's the end of the beginner class for today. Okay, I'm still on schedule, so I'm good. So now we're going to go over to the advanced class, and we're going to talk some more about RAW. We talked about RAW images last month on how this is basically unshipping the warp drives on your camera. You buy yourself a whole new camera by turning on the RAW, okay? Because if you shoot JPEG, everything coming out of your camera has been cooked, and cooked according to the specifications of an engineer in Japan, not to your taste, to theirs, based on consensus. Some cameras are better at this than others. I will tell you right now that my Fuji runs rings around my Olympus when it comes to making JPEGs, because Fuji spent a lot of time translating their film looks into JPEG filters, into JPEG settings. So I can say, I want my JPEG to look like Velvia film, and Lord help me if it doesn't look like Velvia film. It does. It does an amazing job. Now, you could tell a RAW file to look like Velvia film, but in the end, all that gets thrown away because it's just the raw data. You know, there might be a preview in it, but the moment you get it into the RAW converter, all that goes away. Bye-bye, gone.
But then when you take RAW, you have to go into
We're going to talk about.
program,
Yes.
in order for you to create RAW.
Yes.
But you don't look. It doesn't come. You don't see the actual picture, right?
No. Here's what's going on. So, in order to, like I said, thank you for the segue. Okay. In order to save images in RAW, you have to navigate your camera's menu and find the image quality setting and change it to RAW, uncompressed RAW, or RAW plus JPEG. Okay. Uncompressed RAW is more for the Sony folks. Sony recently added this because people found out that they were actually taking 14-bit color RAWs and compressing them down to 12 to save space. And basically we're throwing away oodles and oodles of color information. So they added through a firmware update an uncompressed RAW which stays at 14-bit. Anyway, and RAW plus JPEG will save the RAW file and will cook you a JPEG copy as if you were shooting regular JPEG and write it on the same card. If you have a camera that has more than one card, you can tell it to write the RAWs on the fast card and JPEGs on the slower card, because JPEGs are going to always be way smaller than your RAWs by a factor of 7, 8, 9, or 10 to 1, depending on how much compression you use on your JPEGs. Okay? So, when you look at a RAW file on your computer, they will look a lot more subdued than what you saw on the camera. Because the camera will try, what the camera's showing in the back is not a RAW, it's actually a JPEG taken from the RAW. It will quickly generate a JPEG thumbnail for you to look at. Okay? But it's not showing you the actual RAW file. It's recorded the RAW file, but it's not showing, it's showing you a JPEG. So it might look okay in the back of the camera, but when you get into the computer, it's going to look a little different. It's going to look a little flatter. The colors are not going to be bursting out at you. Okay?
But let me ask a question. Do you have to, you said put it in a computer, is it a certain software you got to put it in?
Yes, we talked about that. We talked about that last month. We covered it. We covered RAW converters. You can, some of the more typical RAW, Lightroom is very popular.
Right, yeah.
You can also do it in Photoshop, which both of those are available through a Creative Cloud subscription.
Right.
You have On1 Photo RAW. You have Skylum Luminar. That's another one. And then there are some that are provided by the camera manufacturers. Canon has their Canon Digital Photo Pro, which is free. Nikon has their software, which is created by Nick Software, which is now owned by DxO. It was owned by Google, but Google sold it to DxO, and now DxO is charging money for it again. But the Nikon software is $79. There is Capture One Pro, which is kind of expensive. It's like around $300-400. But that one is like that's a studio level camera system. Sony cameras get a free copy of it, but it works only with Sony cameras. It only won't work with any others. If you get the full version, it works with all kinds and colors of cameras. Okay? Or if you buy one of those $59,000 phase ones, you get that too. Okay? They throw it in for you. Here.
You know, I always hear people always talk about, you know, shooting in RAW, shooting in RAW.
Yeah.
And I know I kind of jump in stuff here because I know a couple of guys already. But the thing about it is it really worth it?
Oh, we're going to get to that. I'm going to be demoing it right now.
No.
Okay?
And is everybody's RAW format the same?
No. RAW formats are unique to each manufacturer. So you have to make sure that whatever RAW software you have supports the camera you're looking for. Even if it may support older models of your camera, if you get a brand spanking new camera, it might take a month or so or a couple months for the RAW software converters to catch up and have the file format. And you might say, well, why doesn't the manufacturer work with them on, you know, updating their software ahead of time with like beta software? And I have spoken to them at length about this, and they say it's because up until they ship it to production, it's changing. So the likes of Adobe, Phase One, those guys, they're going to wait until these guys cast it in stone before they start messing with it. So you may, if you get, let's say you went and you got the new Nikon Z7 that came out last year. You bought it day one. You're going to be shooting JPEGs with it for quite a while until the software catches up with it. Yes, sir?
So you're saying that if Nikon releases a new firmware, and that firmware happens to mess with it?
No, the format has been stabilized. They can't change the format.
Is that a law? Or that
It's a rule. It's a rule. Once they settle the format's done. It's not changing, and it's more the metadata in the format, not the data itself, because the sensors all release pretty much the same information. The sensors Nikon uses Nikon has a standard sensor format, but it's the metadata surrounding the RAW file that gets changed.
Okay, the reason why I don't want to get too bogged down on that, because the reason why I ask is because what I notice
Yes.
on social media.
Yes.
Okay, like I said, you know, I'm out there doing this stuff.
Yes.
I got people that I'm competing with and stuff like that. Social media, people want things now.
Right.
Okay, they don't. I'm seeing people putting out stuff already. You can see that they haven't doing no production work on it.
Exactly.
Much, and they're getting it out there. So that's why my question is.
This is why
somebody would want to spend that much time on raw, unless
Okay.
you're doing like an art show, something, a particular picture that.
Exactly, exactly. It's a use case. It's a use case. If you're doing event photography,
Right.
you're doing photojournalism, you're doing things that have a time crunch, you'll shoot JPEG, or if you have the card space, you'll shoot RAW plus JPEG. To get them, the initial photos, you send them the JPEGs and let them mess with it. You can edit JPEGs. I'm not saying you can't. But if you're a quality purist, RAW is the way to go. You're Ken Rockwell fan, JPEG is the way to go. Y'all know who Ken Rockwell is, right? He's the Chuck Norris of photography. Okay? He runs a website. It looks like from the 90s, okay? And his camera reviews are,
Fireplace,
well,
the clock, the mantle.
no. His camera reviews are entertaining, to say the least, in that he says stuff that goes contrary to what everybody else says. So I'm talking about shooting RAW. He goes, nah, you don't need RAW. JPEGs are good enough.
He's non-scientific.
He is absolutely non-scientific. So we refer to him as the Chuck Norris of photography because, like, for example, he doesn't have to wait for the sun to get into position for a good shot. The sun will move for him.
Right.
Okay, so, and he's not ashamed to ask for money in his website. Yet the dude drives a Mercedes. Okay.
His kid looks pretty well fed too.
Yeah, his kid looks very well fed. Anyway,
He's a little big.
don't get me wrong. He's got a huge fan base. There are folks that love him, you know? And then there's those of us who know better. I'm throwing that out there on YouTube. All right. So anyway, so getting back to this real quick. Okay, so generally the RAW files are unprocessed. And if they did look processed on your camera, they will look unprocessed on your computer. We're going to get to that in a second. Okay? Also, RAW converters have one redeeming feature. You can undo everything you've done to an image all the way back to square one. You can start over from the beginning, even after you've been working on it for 10 hours, making all kinds of goofy changes and saving them. You can undo everything all the way back to the start because they save the changes in what's called a Delta sidecar file. It's not saved in the photo, it's saved in a file next to it, usually with an extension called XMP or something like that. They will save it in a sidecar file. Lightroom puts it in a database, okay? But most of the other softwares will put it, you might see a proliferation of XMP files. Those are the changes you've made to photos in your RAW converter. Now, getting back to what you're saying, yes, if your use case is time crunch, get JPEGs. But if you want to mess with the RAW files later, set your camera to RAW plus JPEG. You get your JPEGs to send in fast to the customer, and then you can go through the RAWs yourself later on for stuff for your portfolio.
But that's what I've been doing. It takes up a lot of space.
It does take up a lot of space. If you have two cards, you have two cards in yours.
Yeah.
What you do is you write RAWs to one and JPEGs to the other.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Have your RAWs right to the fast card, because I think you have one XQD card and you have one.
Yeah, I haven't got the SD card yet.
No, yeah, you have to get a second card for it. But it has an XQD. Those XQD cards are expensive,
Yeah,
but
that's
they
what I'm
are
saying.
super fast.
Right.
The one I'm looking at has got an XQD card in it, and that's it. So
Right.
anyway, we carry on the fight for love and glory. All right, so I'm now going to do a live demonstration using Darktable. Whatever I'm doing in Darktable can be applied to Lightroom and any of the other applications because the controls are generally the same. I am not going to be using filters like in Instagram or anything like that. So,
But like.
But before you get to it, and I know you're going to show me, and I'm sorry to ask the question because this is you hitting stuff that I really want to know about.
yeah,
The thing about it is that if you take a blurry image,
Mhm.
or if you take an image that, just a little off, whatever.
Yeah.
Right, but it happens, blurry.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, that's basically not a shot.
yeah.
Does the raw really makes it not that much better?
If
Oh.
it is softness, not blur. Blur is a different thing. There's softness, like the image, it just doesn't look sharp.
Not tack sharp.
Not tack sharp. You can apply sharpening to the image and more so to a RAW than a JPEG.
Okay.
Okay? There's a lot more leeway. There's a lot more. RAWs are much more stretchy than JPEGs as far as editing concerned. Also understand that a JPEG file, and I explained this last
Right,
month's
yeah,
class,
yeah, I know.
a JPEG file is a lossy specification.
Right.
It was invented by the IEEE to get high resolution images through modems. And it does it by throwing away pixels. And every time you edit a JPEG file and save it, you throw away more pixels.
Yeah.
And you could, like I said, my favorite gag is take a picture of a 120-year-old person who has a mass of wrinkles, okay? Save that file. Don't make any changes. Just save that file. Save each generation of that file. Do a save as. And each save as, do a save as, and do a save as, and do a save as. Do it 100 times with compression. And by the time you get to 50 or 60, the 50 or 60th generation of it, you'll have given them a facelift. They'll look like Barbie or Ken, okay? Because it will have thrown away so many pixels that their skin will look smooth. Because it's just going to be chucking data away. Whereas every time you save something off of a RAW file, it's first generation. Even if it's a JPEG, it's going to be a first generation JPEG, fresh out of the oven, every single time.
So as far as open source.
Open source
I
choices.
You said Darktable. Is that like?
Darktable looks more like Lightroom.
Is that open source?
Yes, it is. It's fully open source, available for Mac, Linux, and Windows.
Okay.
There's also Raw Therapy, which also is available for Mac, Linux, and Windows, but that one's a little more sophisticated. It's got more technical controls to it. Darktable is a little more Lightroom-like.
So that's more middle of the road.
It's got plenty of sophistication, but it hides it in a good way, so that you can turn on the bits you need and turn off the bits you don't need. Okay, we're going to show it. I'm going to show it to you right now. Before we do that, I'm going to just jump ahead real quick to. Okay, we're going to get the demo going now, and I'm just going to go ahead and get our challenge put in for next month.
Okay.
We're accumulating challenges, man. You've been behaving.
I uploaded today again.
Yeah, you've been behaving. Everybody else been slacking. Okay, so our monthly challenge number 3 is going to be musical instruments. Okay, so that's it for my slides. We're now going to switch over to the demo. So if you'll excuse me one second while I start switching things
Is
around.
shadows good or shadows bad?
Huh?
Because like that picture, it shows the shadow of the guitar.
It's not a hard and fast. Okay, it's bad if you want it to be a catalog image, because the catalog images want no shadows. They want blankness. They want the product floating like it's floating in space. Okay, and could somebody run and close that door?
Yeah, I'm here. We heard.
So April challenge.
Yes, the April challenge is musical instruments. Okay, so now let me just switch my sources here.
Oh yeah.
Ah, dang it! Press the wrong button. All right.
The release is refined.
Yep.
We lost 5 people just from retirements alone. Just crazy.
Okay, so let me. Juan Badilla.
Who was that?
He was he retired ages ago.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the Padilla company, right?
He's related to them.
Yeah,
He's actually related to them.
He actually was written out of the will because he turned 8.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
the whole-
Maybe you didn't want to say that while I was recording it on YouTube. Anyway.
Sorry about that.
But that's okay. We won't speak ill of the dead. All right, so on the screen now you have, that's Darktable. This is what greets you when you open up the Darktable screen. Lightroom is kind of similar to that.
Can I kill the lights?
Yeah, go ahead and kill the lights. So I can't promise that this thing is I also can't promise that the color on that monitor is very good. I haven't color corrected that screen. Yeah, and I'm gonna have to. Fortunately, I'm not in the camera right now because it's not in this shot. So I can stick my head over this because I can't see it here. I have to see it up there. All right. So now let me just haul my mouse over here. So like I said, most of these applications that are Lightroom-like will have the same process. You're going to import your images. It will have a baseline that it will apply to your images. And then you can start, it'll have what's called a light table. So it's going to show you like thumbnails of all the photographs. So you can kind of quickly go through, pick the ones you like, and then edit those instead of editing all of them. And then, a good workflow is import, then bring it up on the light table, cut out the pictures you don't need to use, or find the ones that are interesting to you, and then edit those. Okay? I don't throw away the ones I cull because who knows, maybe one day in the future the software is going to get so freaking amazing that I might be able to rescue that one too. Or I might use it for something else later that's going to be heavily photoshopped, and it doesn't matter how bad it looks. Yes, sir.
Okay. As a Sony user, would you recommend going with the Capture One?
Well, it's free. I wouldn't complain.
Okay, or because this, if I switch Sony sometime in the future, it's better just to learn Darktable because that's full spectrum as far as.
Yes, it is. You can. If you learn Capture One, the Sony version is only for Sonys. You'd have to go to the full Capture One to be able to use it in with a different camera.
Right, across manufacturers.
Across manufacturers. So that's going to involve you some money. If you learn this one, it's free and it supports a bazillion cameras. Okay. So first thing we're going to do now is we're going to import the images. Okay. So I'm going to go and import a folder, which I already have uploaded into my computer. Where's my pictures? Here's my pictures. Photos. And I already used some software that helped me get this all squared away. So this is my folder. I'm going to import this and make sure I hit open. Okay. So I took some pictures today of the subjects who would not be complaining. My dogs. Okay, so we're going to work with this picture of Newton because he's got his mouth open.
Is Raf the name of the dog or the raw?
No, Raf is the name of the. This is the extension of the raw file.
I'm just messing with you.
Ah. No, that's a good point.
Raf, Raf.
No, that's the noise he makes.
That's what I thought too.
Okay, so this is the light table. You see here. Now, for some strange reason, when I took his photographs, I was kind of tilted and I wasn't flat. So even though I shot it in a portrait orientation, the portrait orientation sensor didn't quite catch it and left it in landscape. Whereas my daughter's dog, Ruby, I managed to get it at a proper angle and it did catch it correctly. So this is why they're rotated. But I can correct this losslessly. So we're going to work with this one. So I'm going to switch over to the editing mode. See, I'm in light table mode right now. So this is very Lightroom-like. So you got the modes up here and stuff like that. And here's where your controls are. And over here is just general information about the images.
Are you going to work with the darker images too to see how much you can?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Now these images have had a basic profile applied to it by Darktable. All these applications will take your photos and there's a basic set of changes that it applies to everything, just automatically. If you want it to not do that, you have to come in and turn it off. It's a setting. By default, it's turned on. It just kind of does a quick adjustment that make the picture not look so flat. So we're going to come over here. We're going to look at Newton here. So I'm double clicking him. So one of the first things I need to do, and I have, that light is reflecting on me, so it's a little hard for me to see. So okay, so here's,
I don't think you can turn off that light.
I don't think we can turn off that light. Those are the
It's the emergency one.
those are the emergency lights. So on this side, you have snapshots. These are like saved instances.
You can throw your shoe at it.
History. Okay, so remember what I told you that it says that it applies a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
So original, this is what the raw file looks like unedited. See what I mean about it being kind of flat?
Yeah.
So it does it for you?
It does this for
So
you.
it does 50% of the work?
It does 50% of the work for you right away. Right away.
That was pretty good. I didn't know that. But now all Lightroom does that?
Lightroom does it too. All of them do
Really?
it. All of them do. This is like a base curve, okay? And it does this. Now,
So, what did you, I missed it, what did you?
okay, so here's what the raw file actually, see this history file here? This is all the changes that have been made to the image so far.
It does it automatically.
It just did this automatically by opening the file. So it went in here, it did orientation, it did it badly. Okay, it sharpened the image up. and it added a base tone curve to it. This is what the raw file actually looks like.
Oh.
You see how flat it is?
Mm.
Now, you want a neutral file like this because that means you can stretch it in all sorts of directions. You want your raw files to be looking like that,
Right.
but this software will do some of the legwork for you. Another thing you can do is, once you have a look that you like, that's something that you generally apply to all of your images, that's your signature appearance, you can actually save that as a preset down here, and you can apply a style, and you can, in Lightroom it's called a preset, and here it's called a style, okay? And you can save it, and then you can just go into the light table, select a whole bunch of them, and just apply it to all of those photos in one shot, and get it done quick.
Is that again, I'm comparing to stuff because, like I said, I'm out there and I'm seeing stuff that, you know, especially for Carnival, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we got photographers up the yin yang.
Yes.
And therefore, I've seen these kind of pictures. I'm so glad we're talking about it. And it has this kind of bluish tint to it.
That's because there's two reasons. There's the unintentional reason and there's the intentional reason. The unintentional reason is that the white balance of the camera got fooled by the multiple different light sources and it calculated the wrong white color value. Okay? White is not exactly white. You know, when if you go to buy light bulbs at Home Depot, wherever, right? It's gonna have they're gonna have like, well, originally, well, you're not gonna see the Kelvin, you have to look for the Kelvin if you know what you're looking for. If you're a photographer, you look for the Kelvin. If you're a regular person, you'll see it'll say soft white, bright white, daylight.
Yeah.
Okay? Soft white is a yellowish, warm light. Okay? Those are what they call a warm light, which is about 2700 Kelvin. Which, Kelvin is literally a temperature measurement. And the warm light is actually cooler than, temperature-wise, is cooler than the cool light. When they say a warm light or a cool light, that's an emotional description, because the reddish yellow glow it implies warmth and heat. Whereas if something is blue, it implies coolness and, you know, and lack of emotion. All right? But on the Kelvin scale, blue is hotter than red because it literally goes up the spectrum. Okay? When I talk about white balance, I will give you all the long hair science behind it if you're interested about it. But know this, 2700K is warm, 3000K is bright, around 5000K is daylight. Anything above that is considered cool light. Like fluorescent lights would be 6500 or above.
And it hurts your eyes, you need to look at it.
Yeah.
It's very glary. It's like those people that put those lights on that blue tinted light on their headlights.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be painful after a while. It can be painful after a while.
Yeah, because
Okay.
it increases light scatter.
Now, you were asking, is shadow a bad thing? Shadow is a tool, just like everything else. If you want to, you can use shadow to add emphasis to a shot, or to show feeling. So like, for example, let's say you do a headshot, straight on pose of someone, and half of their face is hidden in shadow. And they're just looking square into the lens with like a neutral expression. All of a sudden, this person just became that much more interesting, because what's the other half of their face doing? You know, you don't know. It's lost in the shadows. It makes them look mysterious. It makes them look, you know, Veronica Lake. Remember her, the actress? Her big deal was that she always had one half of her face covered with hair. Okay, to make her look mysterious. You know, she would pull it, but always come back and cover like part of her face. It made her look mysterious.
And the other half is never the same.
Yes. Anyway, so to be honest with you, I'm going to get up a second. Since the camera's not recording me, I can get up and move around a second, because I want to see what it looks like from your end on that. I'm looking at it from an angle, and that's not a very good angle to look at it from. Okay, so I'm going to tell you right now the brightness on that monitor is up a little too high for photography work, but we're going to live with that, because on my screen, the right half of Newton's face is in a little bit deeper shadow than what is being shown on that screen up there. Okay? If you want, what I can do afterwards is I can drag it over here to this monitor so you can see it. You guys want to come around and see it afterwards, okay? All right, so the first thing I have to do is, well, the first thing wrong with that picture is that it's oriented wrong, so I have to correct the orientation. Okay, so I have to go to the control for that. Okay, so these are groups of controls. This is what's on currently. So what's on here is orientation, and I can expand orientation here.
Isn't it also on the left there where it says history?
Okay. No. Okay. This is what's been done to the photo. Those are the actual control. This is what's on and off. This is the on-off switches.
That's the state and those are the controls.
Right. So I'm now going to make another orientation change where I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees counterclockwise. Bam. That's been corrected. You'll notice now I have another orientation step added here. Right. Okay? So now, there are some things that have been done ahead of time. This is all that's been done ahead of time to your image to get it going. Now, one other thing I like to do, if I can see it there, is I want to apply lens correction.
Yes, it's the bottom one.
Yeah, it's a little hard for me to see. So, you see it has identified my camera and my lens. So I turn on lens correction. I want to get to the first icon there. Am I on it?
Why don't you mirror your laptop?
No, because then this screen over here is a mess.
Okay.
Lens correction, I see that even when you...
Watch the image. Watch the image when I turn this on. Did you see how it altered a little bit? It got a little bit bigger because the 50mm lens I'm using is a very flat lens. But like say you're using a wider lens, that'll correct for barrel or pincushion distortion. Barrel distortion is what makes the image look like this to you. You know, like your stomach, like person, like, remember way back that there was a fad of taking pictures of dogs and their face was like distorted, like their noses were huge and their bodies were tiny. It was the dog, right?
For the dog food commercial.
Right. Well, no, it was cards, birthday card, whatever. It was all over the place. It was a fad. Yeah. It was a meme before memes were memes. Anyway, that was done using a super wide-angle lens and just taking a close-up of the dog and causing extreme barrel distortion. Okay? Have you ever noticed if your camera has a panorama function, that if you stand still and do this, whatever you took a picture of, let's say it's a building, it does this. It kind of like swings out towards you. Like the middle is closer to you than the sides, even though the wall is flat in front of you. Because look at what you did when you moved the camera. I'm gonna move it vertically. What I do, I made a circle. So yeah, when I'm here, I'm actually closer to the building than when I am over here. Right. If you want to take a proper panorama, you actually have to do this.
Yeah, slide across.
You have to slide across. And they actually make slides for doing that sort of thing. There's even automated ones where you just put it on there, go, and it goes click, 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 click. And it just moves the camera across on a skate and takes the pictures. And then you can just stitch them together afterwards. Okay? But that's advanced photo editing. All right, so I've turned on my lens correction to account for any distortion. It also will get rid of any kind of vignette in the corners. Sometimes the lenses don't quite light up the whole circle of the sensor, especially with full frame cameras, and they might have like little dark corners, which you may or may not want, but if by default they'll tell you, okay, let's get rid of it unless you want to add it back in. So it'll like clean out the vignette in the corners and will also make sure that your person's face looks flattering. This is why you shoot portraits with longer focal length lenses, because they tend to take a flatter image. You saw how little it modified the image. So a person's face will not be bulging out towards the camera. Taking wide angle photos of people close up is a recipe to get slapped. Okay, so now let's say, for example, I want to do some adjustments of the color. I come here to the color section, okay, and it has some basic settings. Let me see, go here, wait, basic group. So here's the basic group. You can do brightness and saturation. You have shadows and highlights. I find that this tool here is very good because it brings out a lot of detail and it opens up the shadows a bit. Like say you wanted to see more of the background. But let's say in this case I don't. I want to try and isolate the dog more from the image. I can just come back here and turn it off. Or I could have just come over here and say, whoops, I kind of went too far. I just come back here and drop it back down to lens correction, and I now went back in my history of changes. You see? So now, let's say for example, I actually do want to add a vignette because I wanna isolate my dog. See, because I find that to be a little too distracting up there.
Yeah.
So I don't want to crop the shot because he's in a nice spot, okay? So I want to add vignette. So I'm going to add another tool here. This is a list of additional tools that I have available to me. It only puts out the general ones that are used, but you can favorite ones. Okay, where's it? Vignette. So I'm going to add a vignette. So there's the vignette. It's there now. There it is. So we're going to open up the vignette, and that's the vignette control. So it's going to say where is this vignette coming from? Where am I centering it? And how much am I doing it? So let's say I want to actually get it a little tighter on him. And now, where's the gauge here? I want to, okay, so fall off strength is how quickly does it go from the image to darkness? Okay, if you have a lot of fall off strength, it's going to get dark really fast. If you have very little, it's going to go gently into that good night, as they say. And then you can have a white vignette or a black vignette. Okay.
Is that a wireless mouse?
This is a wireless mouse, yes.
Why don't you swing around to the side of the table? We'll put a chair for you there because you're killing yourself.
Yeah, I am killing myself.
Yeah, just grab this, because you can be like right there.
Yeah. Okay, so, oh, that's much better.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, I came over here and I started bringing down the brightness, trying to blacken up the image as much as possible on there. So when I feel like, oh, okay, that's kind of fine, but I want to kind of tighten it up a little more. So as I tighten it up, and I'm bringing in the fall off now.
Is that the width and the height ratio too?
Yeah, the width and height is whether it's going to be an oval or is it going to be or if it's going to be a circle.
Okay.
So let's say I want to move the center. Here's the center. I'm going to move it so it's like right here and like right between his eyes, like right there in his snoot, right? And I got the vignette right there to about the tips of his ears, but I want to really darken up that outside, so I'm going to bring up the fall off, and really tighten it up.
Wow.
Nice.
I didn't know you can do all that.
Oh yeah.
Does duct tape work on JPEG too, or just?
Yes, it does, but you get more mileage out of RAWs than you do out of JPEGs.
Okay.
This kind of stuff you can do in a JPEG.
Yeah,
But like stretching the exposure and all that other stuff, that you get more of out of RAWs because there's more data to work with.
Okay, because you see the little, I'm so glad you put it because there's a light to the left that's shining on his face.
Right, that's from the window. That's
Right.
the light source of the shot.
Right, so what I'm saying is that could RAW fix that?
You mean like cut down on this brightness here?
Yes.
Even it out? Yeah,
What
absolutely.
he's saying is, can you control zoned exposure?
Actually, there's a zone exposure tool right here.
Boom. There you go. That's what you want.
So I can activate zone system. Just expand it. All right, so this is this zone over here.
Right.
So I can come over here and take this zone and I say, okay, I want this area. So like, let me hover over this. Where's the one that's got his face? There it is. That's the one with his face right there.
Right.
Okay. So I'm going to create a marker here. And I'm going to darken that up a little bit.
It affects the whole picture though.
It does affect the whole picture, but then I can come over here and, like these other ones here, I can go here and just pull it back out. See? You can mess with it. It's something to do.
It's a little idea. It's messing with us now.
It is messing with it. And to be honest with you, like I said, this screen is not showing it as well as it could.
Right.
Okay?
But that's what I'm saying. So that's basically Photoshop then.
Yeah, it had, okay.
Because,
Lightroom,
I mean-
Lightroom is basically the 20% of Photoshop you use 80% of the time.
Right, yeah, because,
And that's what this is. And that's what this is too.
yeah, because you're controlling, and this is what I'm saying, you're controlling that light right there. You can see, it's very distinctive.
Mm-hmm.
But you cannot, even though you shot it in RAW, you know, it's not correcting it right. I would expect.
Well, part of the problem here is, again, this monitor is really, really bad.
That's it, that's a giant shitty monitor, that's what it is.
You know, we're looking at a giant shitty monitor that is just not calibrated whatsoever, okay? And there are many, many controls for adjusting this. Tone curves, levels. You can also do things like tone mapping, which will do all kinds of crazy stuff to the image. And like, again, everything can be undone. This control up here is very important, and this is showing how powerful, how much dark and how much light is going on in here. So there's actually more dark parts than there are light parts. And so if things go off the top, that means they've been over or underexposed.
Okay.
At this end, if they're going off the top, it's underexposed. At this end, if they go off the top, it's overexposed. And you can also see the red, green, and blue channels as well. Okay?
But, okay, you said underexposed. That light right there.
No,
the
this side underexposed, this side overexposed. This is
Okay.
this is the light side, this is the dark side.
Okay, so the light that's on his face,
Yes,
it's on the left side.
right. This is not tucking, this is not, okay, that graph
Right.
is absolute. It's not relative to the image.
Okay.
It's absolute.
Okay.
It's the whole range of light exposure.
Right.
It doesn't matter where it's at.
Right? The left side is the dark end, the right side is the light end.
Mhm.
It's always that.
Mhm.
For whatever image. It doesn't matter if the image is reversed. It-
So could you straighten that out and make it?
yes, you can
Okay.
using levels.
Mhm.
You come over here, expand it. So you've got your levels here, and then you can actually do a manual adjustment, or you can have an automatic adjustment, and then you can come here and say, well, my whites are too high, so I want to kind of bring them down just a hair. Actually, I'm brightening them up wrong way. I gotta
You're gonna bring up the blacks.
bring up the blacks and a little bit on the grays. You see how it's darkening it overall? But I can bring my grays back a little bit. And now, yes, his jaw is lit up because it's being side lit.
Mhm.
But now I've got a better contrast between his unlit side and his lit side. Okay?
It's not as drastic.
It's not as drastic. Remember I told you about film simulations?
Right, but this is what I'm saying.
Watch this
The
one.
average person, and they look at a photograph, do they really gonna notice that? You know what I'm trying to say?
The average Joe.
The time that you spend.
No, remember what I said. Remember what I said earlier, Murray.
Right.
What is your target audience? If your target audience wants the stuff quick, JPEG is the way to go. If your camera does the JPEGs the way you like it, fine and dandy. This is for you. Now, if you're going to be hanging stuff in galleries,
Right, yeah.
raw
Raw.
is the way to go. If you're
Right.
going to be, somebody's paying you to take a portrait,
Right,
raw is the way to go.
okay,
Okay, if, like for example, when I do corporate headshots, I do not run JPEGs, I run RAWs.
right,
Okay, I do those as, I don't try and crank them out as quick as I can, it's a photo shoot.
right.
Okay?
Mhm.
If you're doing a photo shoot
Mhm.
where the person is there and is not in a hurry to be anywhere,
Right.
shoot RAW.
Shoot raw.
And then you worry about the images afterwards. If they're in a rush,
Mhm.
JPEG or RAW plus JPEG.
Right.
You know, the RAW's for yourself for later in case you want to mess with something and maybe throw it into your
Yeah, because
throw it into your
sometimes,
portfolio.
sometimes like, you know, they may want like a particular picture they like, and they wanna use that as their main picture thing. Then you use that raw, you go into raw and work on that.
Yes.
And then you give it to them.
Exactly.
That's it. Okay.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly. You
Okay.
might give them the JPEGs out there, quick
Right.
gallery, here's what you want. Oh, I like that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one.
It's for that special shot.
Right.
You know, and now you want one that's like, oh, I'd love to have this one, you know,
Right.
18 feet tall.
Right.
Okay, let me work on that. And that's
Right.
when you start bringing out the raw editors and you start working on massaging that photo to something that will be 18 feet tall and you can see it properly.
Right.
'Cause it also depends how far away, okay, one, what's the target medium your image is gonna end up on? If it's gonna be on the web, JPEGs.
Mhm.
Instagram millennial.
You know, Instagram millennial, JPEGs are fine. But if you're going to be hanging this on a wall somewhere,
Oh, right, yeah.
then you have to think about what you want to do with that, okay?
Mhm.
Now, granted, if it's going on a billboard,
Mhm.
who cares? You know how big the images are for billboards? You know how many megapixels you need to make a billboard image? Guess.
100 megapixels?
Four?
4.
That's it?
Not designed to be seen from your nose away. It's
Right,
designed to be
exactly.
seen from hundreds of yards away, as they
It's
say
like
in
looking at it
Scotland.
across the Palmetto.
Palmetto,
right?
yeah.
You design, you know, from a
Okay.
quarter mile.
You get up to it, it's a blur, you know?
You know, when you get up to it, it's got big fat pixels.
Right, yeah.
But you're looking at it from a quarter of a mile away.
Yeah.
You know, it's not designed to be looked up close. Now, you go to an art gallery and you see a wall-sized photograph. You don't see people staring at it from all the way back there unless they want to take the whole thing in.
Right.
You're gonna have people. Oh, look, there's that large. And it's like, especially if you have one of those gigapixel images where they have like stitched together like 10,000 photographs and everyone is in excruciating detail. They're like, whip up. Oh, look, there's my cousin at the presidential inauguration. You know, that kind of thing.
But let me ask you a question. When you go to like a store like a Macy's or these type of stores, and you see these little models, they have these photographs, you know, of Kim Kardashian or whoever, and they're wearing, you know, some kind of jewelry or something. You see these big, you know, I'm talking like poster size, huge.
They paid photographers a lot of money, especially if that was like a Kardashian. Oh, you know they're gonna get. Nobody does a Kardashian for free.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is not so much about the Kardashian. I'm just talking about the models themselves.
Even
that
the
are on
models.
there.
Even the models.
And you know, I'm talking about you know, you walk into and you see these like, you know, they're like
Yeah, the
this,
life
they're-
size, the
they're
life
life
size.
size, or they, you know,
Yeah,
they're
okay.
huge and
That's those were not taken on the fly at a show. Those were a studio session that was paid for by Macy's or the company or whoever, or even the PR firm
Right.
that's working for them to get these products out there and people to buy them. The whole point of this, you're not going to use some crappy JPEG if you're trying to sell Tommy Hilfiger sweaters.
And they make them look alien skinny too.
You know, so Tommy Hilfiger will pay through the nose for his products to look amazing, which means you're not going to take some crappy JPEG. You're going to take high resolution raw images and you're going to process. You're going to spend a ton of money on lights and correcting everything and being very careful to get the job done right.
You see these images now because a lot of it emotion. Like I saw one where the guy, and you know, he's taking a picture showing, I guess, from underneath, right?
Yeah.
And it's street. It's
Right.
a street photography, right?
Okay.
And the one guy's kicking the football.
Yes.
Right? And the guy next to him is like ready to like catch it or whatever. You
Yes.
know, let's say. All right?
Mhm.
And it's in the street.
Mhm.
It's not in the studio, it's in the street.
Oh, you made me think it is. You made me think it is.
Really?
Oh yeah. Doesn't necessarily have to be.
Mm.
It could be multiple shots.
Oh, really?
They could have not been near each other. That they're both in a perfect position
Yes.
in midair
Mhm.
with the ball
Yeah.
and all that stuff. No, man, that's been photoshopped. That's multiple images stitched together in Photoshop,
Layered and everything.
layered on with Photoshop. That's
Wow.
that's
I wonder, how the hell did he get that shot like that?
that's some
He saw-
serious studio. Now, if it's a dude on a skateboard doing his thing,
Mhm.
then they're gonna have him go and do it multiple times, and they're gonna have lights and all kinds of crazy stuff happening at the same time. But those kind of stuff with models, they're not that athletic, okay? And
They're
a
not
couple
real.
times,
They're not
and
real. The picture's not gonna be real either.
you know, they're selling a fantasy. They are selling you a fantasy, and that's what it is. So carrying on our merry way, real quick, I threw some Velvia on there to improve his color tones.
Mhm.
Okay, I happen to like the color
Yeah.
the Velvia color that this provides rather than the filmic.
Mhm.
Okay, and if I really wanted to, okay, we're gonna come back to the shadows and highlights a second. Let's say, for example, let's go over here. Okay, so we're gonna close. I'm not gonna mess with the levels too much. Okay, close that. Where's my shadows and highlights? Okay, so highlight reconstruction tries to fix it. Raw black and white points is something that's applied by the system. Let me see, where is it? Here it is. Okay, so shadows and highlights, we're going to turn that on. I'm going to turn this up, but what I want to do is, I don't want to lighten the shadows, I want to darken the shadows. So I'm going to turn my shadows and kind of bring it down a little bit
Mhm.
to give me that contrast from the light side and the dark side.
Mhm.
And you see how much of an improvement, and you pay attention up here, you see what's happening, you'll see what's happening.
It's almost evening out.
Yeah, it's kind of evening out, okay? If I bring down the white point a little bit, it'll dark. You can't do too much. You always got to do just a little bit, because if you do too much, then it starts turning gray or weird. You know, some software is better than others at that respect. This one's kind of a middle of the road solution, so apply your controls lightly. Don't just throw the lever all the way to one end, because then you're gonna, the Photoshop police is gonna come looking for you, and then you're like, what the hell did I do? That's when you got to run over to the history thing and go back to where you started from. You know, they're like, what the heck? And remember, I can just come back over here and turn all this stuff off. Okay, here I am, back where I was. Base curve, this is where I started from, go back to where I am now. Look at the difference.
I'm just used to getting a before and after. Now you have, you can go 10 generations back.
Yeah. So here's what I started with. Okay, with the correct. This is no corrections, just rotating.
Rotate, right.
Now this is with my corrections applied.
Wow. Just a tweak, just a tad.
Just a little bit, but now you can see the hairs on his
Yeah,
face.
it's much more
You can see his
detailed.
eyelashes.
Texture.
Okay, the texture's brought up. The color's a lot more vibrant.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Nice.
But the colours need not be accurate. I mean, it's a great picture, but is he really that colour?
He actually is.
Right.
He's a
Retriever.
golden retriever.
He's a golden one.
He's a golden retriever. And plus, remember, he's got sunlight pouring on him, which is very warm light.
Right, right.
Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. This is what you can accomplish with a raw file. Now, if I want to export it to something useful, I can also do things like throw on my watermark, that kind of thing. If I want to export it to send it up to a gallery or something like that, I'll put my watermark on it. Or you can use a third-party tool for batch watermarking if it's going to be a bunch of them.
Yeah, that was my next question.
You can do individual watermarks here. There is a watermarking tool. But I find it to be kind of a chore.
Right.
You can use other tools to do it. There's a lot of
So-
freebie watermarking tools.
Is there one that think about
When you say watermark, you mean like putting like your name?
Your logo.
The logo?
Your name or your logo somewhere. I wouldn't
Right.
stick it in the middle of the photo
Right,
unless,
right.
a watermark can be,
for copyright.
no, you put I would put, normally what I do is I'll put my logo over here, down here in this corner, right?
But generally speaking, that's what most people do.
Right, but
Mhm.
studios,
Mhm.
what they'll do is they'll put the word proof diagonally across the image
Right,
in a semi-transparent font.
right.
Yeah.
So somebody doesn't just go and do click, thanks, I don't need any more, and run away with a screenshot. That's all I wanted.
Right.
Thanks. I'm not buying anything from you.
Right.
The jerk.
The jerk.
Yeah.
Right.
The ones that always want the pro bono stuff.
Mhm.
The ones that I tend to get. Can't you do it for your portfolio? No, my portfolio is perfectly fine, thank you very much.
This cell phone stuff is really kind of killing me though, man.
It is.
Because it's, I see these girls and and it looks, sometimes these pictures look really good on the phone. They really do.
Yes,
Until you open it up really and you go, wait a minute, right?
Yes,
We know
exactly.
that.
Yeah,
It's
this
the
small,
medium.
it looks fine.
It's the medium.
But it's the medium, right? When you're there and you're looking at a 5x6, whatever, blah, blah, blah. If obviously it's compressed, it looks,
Okay, here's what you do. If you have someone who has trouble being convinced,
Mhm.
you get them to be a willing participant in a little experiment.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
set them up very calmly for a photo shoot.
Mhm.
You take the photograph
Mhm.
with your camera
Mhm.
in RAW with proper lights and the whole 9 yards.
Right.
Then you do the same thing
Mhm.
with the phone and
Mhm.
take the picture.
Mhm.
Okay? Then you ask her, it'll be her phone. You ask her, I would like a copy of that picture, please.
Mhm.
Send me the copy of the picture. However she sends it.
Right.
Don't give her special instructions. Him or her, don't give them special instructions.
I'll have to send you a low resolution.
They'll send you something. Okay? You take it, and then you go and you print both of them at least 16 by 20. If you can do 20 by 30, even better.
Mhm.
Go ahead and do that. And tell them, pick which one's the phone.
Right. No, but Carlos, I agree with you. I know that. But again, people today, especially they are so hung up. Let me tell you something. These guys put this stuff out so fast.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's like almost like, I kind of get pissed because it's like they're not even thinking of quality. But then these women
Mhm.
spend more or less.
Mhm.
And they just want to know they're in these bikinis or these
Yeah.
carnival costumes.
Exactly.
And people are seeing them.
Mm-hmm.
But I keep on telling them, you can't do nothing with it.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep.
What you see the phone, that's
That's
what
it.
you got.
That's
I mean,
all
so
you
I
got.
mean, sorry, you could be taking pictures. It's wirely transmitting the pictures to your phone,
Mhm.
and then your phone is
I
uploaded.
do that,
Yeah.
I do that, but again, you.
So when you're done, you come over here and you do export selected photos, and then you can get yourself a JPEG or a TIFF file or a PNG or
Yeah,
whatever
no,
format you
I'm
want.
all in.
Out
I'm all
goes.
in. I'm
Out it
all in.
goes. Okay.
Copy.
Also, if your camera happens to have a GPS function in, like most Sonys do, you can actually see a map of where you took the photos.
Right.
There's a geotagging function. Or if you have geographical information that was captured by a GPS when you're doing the photos, you can take the file, drop it in here, and apply it to all the photographs.
Got it.
Yes, sir.
Can we just do just a quick, because I have to go, but a
Yeah.
quick shadow recovery of the dog on the right?
Ruby, okay.
Yeah.
Let's do a shadow recovery of Rubes.
Yeah, 'cause that
So
was
here
kinda-
comes the basic adjustments. Okay, so she's on a darker background and she's got some black and white contrast there. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna do shadows and highlights, and we're done.
That was painful.
Wow.
Okay, if I really wanted to kick it up a notch, let's throw Velvia in the mix just to get my colors a little bit more saturated. And I'm good. I'm good with that.
Yeah, you know what she looks like? She looks a little rusty. That's good.
She's 8 years old. She's missing most of her teeth too, poor thing. She was a foster that my daughter rescued. She's not living with my daughter at the moment because my daughter's working at.
So if she attacks you, she'll gum you to death.
Pretty much. But she has adopted my pup as hers, so she's teaching him how to wrestle and stuff like that. Anyway, so yeah, she's a great dog. Yeah, this has all kinds of crazy controls that you would never believe possible. I'm just showing you some of the basic ones here, so you can see what happens. And like I said, a little shadow recovery. Like this image is generally dark because there's a lot of dark colors. There's not a lot of white in it. You can see it by over here on the graph. Most of it's dark.
It's all to the left.
But it's not overexposed. It's not underexposed.
So Carlos, that first button on the left, when you want Darktable to do it automatically, that's the one that you hit.
Okay, the automatic stuff that happened was no, that's just turning it on. I'm just
Oh,
turning
oh,
on.
that's
the-
on and off.
On and off. It's just turning on and off the control.
Got it. Yeah, because I can't see it from here.
Yeah, it's a little hard. It's the universal symbol. It's this symbol right.
Yeah, the off button.
It's
Okay.
this one right here, the
On-off
on-off button.
Yeah.
So you're turning each individual one on and off.
Okay.
Like I said, hey, oh yeah, by the way, one other thing I would do is just the lens correction. And that's it. And that's all that photo needed. Didn't need much else. Now, I could save those 3 controls. Let's say the shadows and highlights, lens correction, and Velvia. Let's say those are my favorite. I save those as a style, and I can apply them. I can just do my culling, pick those, and then just go apply. And then there's maybe 1 or 2 that might need a little tweaking at the end.
It's like a macro.
And it's a macro, and you're done. And you can, and then, believe me, you can crank through.
I mean, this is heaven for me. I've been using FS Capture, which is
Darktable.org.
I'll be there tonight.
Yes.
Okay, so okay, are we gonna look at any of the things that we've uploaded? So at least these guys can get.
Yes, we're gonna go do that right now,
Maybe we can
real quick, because we're at 7 o'clock already, so we're kind of close to our limit.
Maybe we can inspire these guys.
Let's inspire some of these guys to. There won't be a judgment today on it because
Just inspiration, please.
just some inspiration. So let me go here and switch us over to Flickr on the screen. And for you guys, let me close Darktable. Okay, so we had 2 challenges. We had the selfie challenge, okay, which even if you've done the selfie challenge before, do it again because I want to see how your skills have advanced.
Yeah, but I want to start seeing some pictures, man.
Maidim was giving me lip about it because she was like, "Well, I did that one before." Like, yeah, and have your skills remained the same or not? So far, we only got 1 from Candido, who got really creative here and got himself in there twice with his camera.
Different angle too.
Yep. I approve of the hat.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool picture.
Yeah. One of the coolest selfies I ever saw. Now, if I didn't have the camera requirement, one of the coolest selfies I ever saw was this fellow at one of the photo clubs, the other photo clubs, who sports a similar hairstyle to Mervin, right? Yeah. And what he did was he had a picture of himself holding an ice cream cone, but the ball of ice cream in the cone was his head as ice cream.
Wow.
He had his head, like the bottom of, like his face was there on the ball of the ice cream, and his face was on it, and then like you could see it looked like ice cream, but then his face was on it, and he was like, ah, like with this shriek of horror while he's licking. Well, he himself was licking the ice cream
With his face on the.
with his face on the ice cream.
Oh, right.
Pretty cool.
It's like that's gotta be one of the slickest selfies I have ever seen in my entire
Very
life.
clever.
Okay, so there's all kinds of clever ways to do this. Now I did have the camera requirement because that's for the noobs to make sure you turn off your flash if you have a pop-up flash on your camera. All right, but the second one was shiny, which is I wanted shiny reflective objects.
The briefcase is good.
I would have zoomed in a bit more on this. I would have tightened the shot more on this one, more on this bit alone, just to make it a little more abstract.
Those everybody put those?
No, that's just him.
Oh, he did it, only him.
The only person who's responded here is Mr. Garcia.
Oh,
Okay. Everybody else has been slacking. Okay.
So how many people really?
Can you critique the ring? The ring? Because I mean, if you can click on it to make it bigger, so they can
Yeah.
actually see it.
Okay, so one, I like the two-tone lighting on it. That's a very interesting thing. But somehow you've managed to mute the shininess of the ring itself. It's muted. It doesn't actually look. I mean, yes,
Yeah,
it's.
it's very shallow. I mean, if you could plus it, you have to make it a little bit bigger, but you can see it.
Let me see if I can.
Yeah.
But
there you go.
are you doing it the soft? Did you like aperture it? And did you open the aperture? So
Yeah.
I noticed it's soft at the back.
Yeah,
Is that
no,
what you were
I'm-
looking for?
Yeah, I'm at 1.8 there.
Oh,
Just
okay.
because it was very dark and and the lighting was not very strong, so I really couldn't. I couldn't tighten the aperture.
You could. You just had to give it a longer shutter speed.
Yeah, that's true.
Just put it on a tripod and
Okay, that'll help it.
And a longer shutter speed.
a longer shutter speed.
Meaning the 1 point.
No. The fraction of a second, whatever your shutter speed was on this shot.
This was
1/60th?
like 2 seconds, I think it was.
Oh, right. Very long.
Yeah, I can't see your exit, so I can't say what it is you have.
I think it was like 2 seconds.
Yeah, but if you had done it with, like, say, let's just put it this way: if you had done it at your 1.8, if you had gone to 2.8, you could have done it in 4 seconds.
Okay.
They're, like I said, remember I said all three of them are related. If you want to stop down one stop, you have to, like, if you want to stop down one stop on your aperture, then you have to increase one stop on your shutter speed or increase the ISO by a stop.
Fine.
Okay.
Okay.
If to make it put it in simpler terms, if you went up 2 clicks on your ISO on your aperture, you either have to go down 2 clicks on your shutter speed, increasing the speed, or up 2 clicks on your ISO, increasing the sensitivity. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whatever you do to one, they're all in balance. You know, when in auto mode, it'll compensate. Like if you put it in aperture priority and you open it all the way down, it's gonna usually try and bump up the ISO as much as possible to keep the shutter speeds high.
Right.
But if you put it in manual mode, that's all you, baby. You have to control it yourself.
Right.
So you go and you say, oh, this, I'm going to lower this. I have to raise this one. And maybe if I want to keep this one the same, I'm going to have to do these two. Or you can like split the difference. Maybe do 1 click of ISO and 1 click of shutter speed or something like that, to kind of split the difference a little bit. Depends on how good your high ISO settings are on your camera too. Okay?
Right.
But still, it's a good image, but I would have preferred it to be
More focus.
well, not more in focus, but
More.
to capture, because it's out of focus, you lost the shininess of the,
Yeah, I was
you
just
lost
trying-
the shine.
I was trying to make the
You
diamond
still
shine.
have a chance to
Yeah.
try again,
Yeah. Okay.
because we're waiting for some more folks to put some photos up,
Yeah.
okay? So let's see, what's the other ones here, let's go.
When do you have the class now? Once a month?
It's once a month, it's the
Oh.
third Wednesday of the month.
Yeah. Okay.
This one is good. I like, see, this one, you were talking about shadows being bad or good, but this is good because
Yes, yeah, no,
it
they
actually
said
gives
yeah.
it depth.
Yes.
Wouldn't
I
be
know
the
they
same
said
without
that.
the shadow.
It would not be the same. It would be rather boring.
Right.
Now
Yeah.
with this, you have the depth.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's interesting because you know, the shadow actually almost looks like a face.
Yeah, it was a weird shot. So I was side shining a light, and,
Mhm.
I was using a 1.7, and
Yeah.
here I'm actually hitting a diamond, the same diamond with a laser. And
Oh, that'll do all kinds of crazy things,
and,
but
and I'm getting the light scatter off of the diamond.
yeah, lasers are. Be very careful when you're using a laser beam. Do not look through your camera. When you use the screen, if you're using a mirrorless camera, you're okay.
Yeah.
But if you're using an optical camera, a camera with optical viewfinder, do not look through the viewfinder. Switch to the screen on the back. You do not want to lose your retina
Yeah.
because it will bounce that beam beep, 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 right into your eye.
Maybe even amplify because it's a diamond.
Yes.
Wow.
So be very, very careful when messing with lasers.
Yeah.
Okay? Carrying on their merry way. Whoops. Over here. Ah!
You're off. You're good.
They're good there.
There we go.
I like that shot for some reason. I like this.
Now,
And it looks, and the screw looks shiny.
it is. You
That's-
get this one. You got the best shiny on this
Yeah,
one. You have the
exactly.
best shiny on this one.
Yeah.
Top of a tripod, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the top of a small tripod. This falls under the category of I would call an ordinary abstract, which is ordinary things in such a tight perspective that they're abstract. You know, the way people don't normally see them, so it makes them abstract.
Yeah. Now that's shiny.
That's got a good shine on it.
Mhm.
I like that one.
Mhm.
This one would have a good shine, but if you zoomed in on it more, like that,
Mhm.
if you cropped it to that,
Yeah.
or retook the shot this close,
A little tighter, right?
a little tighter like that, I can still tell it's a suitcase because you can see the handle and the background's out of focus,
Right.
and that's the corner of it. But you would have gotten more of the shine detail in place.
Are you putting that on a tripod?
No, this is all handheld.
Handheld? Okay.
Yeah, he was being quick about it. And this is
Yeah.
some sort of
Yeah.
metal rod with a ball at the end.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure
It's
it out.
it's a banana hook.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
My wife uses it as a jewelry hook.
Oh, right.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, we got tired of the bananas self-peeling and falling to the counter. So
And then this one here, he got his selfie on.
That's pretty cool.
So, all right. At least, gentlemen, please participate so I can make some judgments.
I'm going through a little.
Okay, and remember, number 3 is musical instruments. Get creative.
Okay.
Get creative. You guys are experienced. You can get creative. And if Bob needs help, help Bob. Because he's got the least seniority of the 3 of you here.
Oh, definitely.
Well, you know where to find me. 'Cause I'm right at the
Oh,
entrance.
yeah, yeah, not far away.
All right. Let me stop the show. Thank you everyone for joining us. And